All right, let's get back to that breaking news from the White House. President Trump announcing a 90-day pause on all reciprocal tariffs as part of the social media post. It's a 90-day pause on tariffs except for China. This is what the president posted online just now. I'm hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the United States. Actually, let's get to the press secretary. She is talking right now. Let's listen in.
From around the world reach out to President Trump and his team here at the White House to negotiate better trade deals for the American worker. We have been overwhelmed with the amount of requests from countries around the world. I'll let the secretary speak to that. We will continue with the tailor-made negotiations that I spoke about yesterday. In the meantime, there will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs as these negotiations are ongoing, and the tariff level will be brought down to a universal 10% tariff. The secretary here has been a huge part of the president's trade team, of course, and will continue to lead these negotiations moving forward to look out for the American worker, which is always President Trump's goal. So I'll kick it over to our great Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
Good, thank you. And we saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Ed, go ahead.
Treasury Secretary, thank you for doing this. Let me ask you three quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China.
Mexico and Canada. Mexico and Canada, are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced the tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
And, if I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Bessent. Can you explain more of the decision-making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No, again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago. The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we have just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So we are expecting them to come with their best deal.
This is a CBS News special report. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maurice DuBois. President Trump making big news this afternoon. He's just announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for many countries around the world. In a Truth Social post here, it's a lengthy one. I'm going to read it to you. The president said, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, he said, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, that's the U.S. Trade Representative, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade, trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs, and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. I have authorized, the president says here, a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And that is the entirety of the president's Truth Social post there. All this has the stock market surging right now, up 5 and 3.3% there, up some 2,000 points at this moment. It's been going back and forth. Let's bring in our Money Watch correspondent, Kelly O'Grady. First reaction here, Kelly, what in the wide world is going on here?
You're seeing a lot of relief in the markets right now. I mean, we are coming off a sell-off this past week and a half at this point. And I'm just going to quote a couple of numbers for you. The NASDAQ is inching up about 8% right now. S&P 500, 6%. Both the S&P and NASDAQ were either flirting with or in bear market territory prior to this announcement. That basically means when that index has lost 20% or more from their recent highs. And it basically just means investors are cautious, they're worried, they're nervous. And you see the fact that we're coming back from this really in the tech stocks and the chip sector. And why? Because if you're going to have a tariff that was once over 30% on countries that we rely on for chips that power the AI industry, and
Taiwan.
By the way, your 401k too.
Right.
Right, Taiwan, and that's going to go down to 10%. That's why investors are reacting so positively right now.
But this is a 90-day pause. That gives them some level of certainty, quote unquote, for the moment. But this is not a long-term thing. So sugar high or not, that remains to be seen. Talk about the psychology here that leads to this kind of euphoric feeling.
And that's exactly right. In fact, I'm texting with investors right now saying, how are you feeling? Is this temporary? Sugar high, I think, is a good way to describe this because we have seen the president with Canada, with Mexico, with other countries do this pause before, where we're going to do it, now we're not going to do it, and at some point in the future, that levy does get put on, those tariffs do get put on. So the investors that I'm talking to are sort of getting back in the sectors where they think that this is going to be a positive, but they are still very cautious because we have seen this change so rapidly, which gets to that uncertainty point, Maurice.
Right. Are you surprised? Or should we be surprised? Or did people see this coming all along? I'm wondering.
Well, I'm never surprised now when we talk about tariffs, Maurice.
Right.
That's the one thing you can be certain about.
Right.
No, people did not expect this today, and that's why you saw, sell-off happening, so much uncertainty in the market. And there's actually this metric that we track about uncertainty. Investors were predicting so much uncertainty over the next 30 days. So no one expected this. And I think right now investors, one actually texted me right before I got on with you, and he said, expect the unexpected. And that is what I'm telling my clients going forward.
Truly. Okay, Kelly, thank you so much. Let's go to Margaret Brennan now. She's in Washington. Margaret, do you have any sense of what led to this moment?
Well, Maurice, in some quick calls I made before coming to speak with you, I was trying to discern exactly that. What I can tell you is that there were two big things that happened today that would be weighing on President Trump's mind. One of them was not just the sell-off in stocks that's been ongoing, but a big shift here when it came to particularly foreign buyers not being very excited about buying U.S. government debt. That short-term debt sale that was supposed to happen, that happens on Wednesday and Thursday, there was a lack of interest from foreign buyers. So not necessarily foreign buyers coming in and selling U.S. government debt, which is how we finance a lot of things in this country, but a concern, saying and showing that there is concern about the long-term and short-term economic health of the United States. Two, you also see over on Capitol Hill some concern about getting the president's budget framework through the House of Representatives. We know as of this weekend, the Speaker of the House was trying to voice confidence that he could get this budget framework through. This is the way they can sort of expedite the other plank of the president's economic platform. Remember, he promised all these tax cuts and funding the border and other Republican initiatives. That got harder for him when he saw some members of the Republican Party stand up and say, I don't like what you're doing in my state when it comes to farmers, for example, who are going to be hit by retaliatory tariffs or the fallout from them. So you had two things weighing on the president's mind there. One, the other plank of his economic platform may be in peril because of the sequencing being off since he went into a trade war without moving the other part of his economic platform first. So the votes were a problem. Also, when it came to the market nervousness. And you can see, we're looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Index there and stocks. But if you look at the debt markets, there was a lot of concern there today. So those are two factors. As one investor said to me, the White House pulled the knife out of their own heart. This wasn't a victory. We did hear from the Treasury Secretary promise of future negotiations with the Japanese and the South Koreans. But CBS reporting to this point is that there isn't really a negotiation underway. There are talks about having talks. So there isn't a deal that was announced here. And when it comes to China, where the Treasury Secretary was saying he's really focused, we don't have any contact at this point.
Okay, Margaret, and as you're speaking there, we see the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, there speaking to reporters outside the White House. If Margaret's still there, I just want to ask you one more question there, Margaret. Can we read anything into the 90 days that the president is going to pause these tariffs? Does 90 days have anything to do with budget negotiations by any chance?
That's an interesting timetable to point to there. In terms of what we knew the expectations were for the votes on those things, that there is the hope that they could get the tax cuts and all that business done by August at the very latest. So the timetables and the sequencing, it's useful to take this off the table is the short answer to your question. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that as well. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much for the insight. Our coverage of the tariff pause will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight, of course, on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Maurice DuBois.
And you were just watching a CBS News special report on this breaking news out of the White House. President Trump pausing tariffs on most nations for 90 days, but raising taxes on Chinese imports to 125%. President Trump posting this online. I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125% effective immediately. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, I have authorized a 90-day pause. Now, earlier in front of the White House, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke out about this pause. Let's listen into his comments from just moments ago.
Let me ask you three quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China. No, China.
Mexico and Canada. Are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors. And what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see, I'm seeing Vietnam today, Japan's at the front of the queue, South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced the tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war. But I am saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
And if I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the Secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the Secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Bassett. Can you explain more of the decision making?
All right, I want to bring Javier David back in here. Javier, first, easiest question. What's your reaction to what we just witnessed here in the past 10 minutes?
Well, what the market wants, the market gets. It can bully the Fed into cutting rates. It can bully Washington politicians. And if you remember the lesson of the brief tenure of the UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, the bond market's the biggest bully of all, and it can intimidate anyone and push politicians out of office. So that's what we're seeing. Once bond markets started registering its disapproval of what was going on, the game changed. I heard the Treasury Secretary just say that Japan is at the front of the queue. There's a reason for that. They are the single biggest holder in international terms, $1.1 trillion worth of Treasury bonds. China's the next one. And if you pick a fight with your creditors, they can inflict real pain on you. And so I think that the Trump administration is learning a very painful lesson of the limits of political power in the bully pulpit.
You know, Scott Bessent there, the Treasury Secretary, said that China is really the main pain point when it comes to the U.S. economy. Can you go into that a little bit, like why the U.S. feels like China is such a thorn in its side when it comes to trade and the economy?
Well, it is a strategic competitor, but it is also has this really strange symbiotic relationship with the United States. They trade with us, we trade with them. We absolutely kind of need one another. But the reality is China has turned itself into the sort of manufacturing warehouse of the world. They produce a lot and they send a lot. And they are very, very stringent about how they allow foreign companies and foreign economies to operate within their borders. So this has been a fight that's been running for decades. And, you know, it's not going to go anywhere, but we're really have reaching something of a tipping point, or a flashpoint rather. And the Trump administration is not going to let this go. And they are right to challenge some of what China's policies are and the way that they defend their own turf. But doing it with 104% tariffs may not be the way to go.
So earlier in this newscast, you said, you know, your advice to people who might have a little bit of money in the stock market, or just regular people who are worried about their grocery bills. What should they be doing about their money right now? What's your advice now over the next 90 days? Is it the same?
Yeah, I mean, look, unless you're retiring tomorrow or next week or anywhere in the immediate term, and in the immediate term, I mean like a month, I wouldn't look at your 401k. It's not going to be good. Don't upset yourself. And it's not good to make emotional investment decisions. But the best thing to do for people that are trying to ride out this volatility, maybe shift a little to cash. The bond market has showed us that that's not the safety bet that we all once thought it was. So that's a dicier proposition, but there's a lot of money moving into cash. And so maybe that's the way to go. And cash, in fact, will give you a little bit of yield, not as much as it did a while back, but because the interest rates have come down. But there's a little bit of a reward to being a saver nowadays.
All right, Javier David, thank you so much for being on standby for this breaking news. I know that they're going to talk to you in the next show. Thank you, sir. Well, let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, who is following this story from us from the newsroom. That press conference in front of the White House with Scott Bessent. We cut out of there for a minute. What else did he have to say, Chanel?
Well, I want to pick up on a point that you were just chatting about with Javier, because when asked if this pause was a response to the plunging stock market, Scott Bessent said, no, this was driven, in fact, by the president's strategy. He also added that last week's announcement was the ceiling, essentially, and now this 10% tariff is the floor. He says while this 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is in place, quote, Everything is on the table. And you remember the White House has said 75 countries have already reached out to the Trump administration to book meetings to try to negotiate a deal. Bessent says now the U.S. will speak to each country separately. These will essentially be separate bespoke negotiations. When it comes to China, I want to mention Bessent said today what China is doing will have an impact for them more than us here in the U.S. because he says they have an export-driven model. But again, listen, big news this hour, Trump pushing pause on those reciprocal tariffs for 90 days.
And Chanel, did Bessent say anything about why the 90 days, why that length of time? Is it to meet with these different countries?
Yeah, there's a suggestion here that because of the sheer volume, we're talking about 75 different countries trying to book meetings with White House officials to renegotiate these tariffs, that this will take time to go through all of these meetings and to try to figure out what the path forward will look like.
And the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said, you know, we all have to read the art of the deal. This is all part of Trump's playbook. I'm curious, did Scott Bessent say anything after that about the so-called art of the deal? Is this an indication that this is our strategy here? Did he allude to anything like that?
Well, I mentioned that there were questions from reporters outside the White House. Why? And why now? Because we've been talking about this the last couple of days, what we've been seeing in the stock market with things plunging so recently. And he said, no, it's not what's happening in the stock market that drove this decision today. It's part of the president's strategy.
All right, CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, thanks so much for keeping an eye on that. All right, so another live look at the big board right now. President Trump pausing tariffs on most nations for 90 days. The Dow currently up 2,500 points. But he's also raising taxes on Chinese imports to 125%. The market's starkly responding to that. President Trump posted this online. I am hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the U.S. to 125% effective immediately. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, I have authorized a 90-day pause. We're going to have much more ahead right here on CBS News 24/7. Lindsay Reiser takes over right after this.